Behind the scenes of security and cybercrime today, interviewing top leaders from around the world and sharing true cybercrime stories to raise awareness. But first, a huge thank you to all of our executive co-producers who subscribed to our Prime membership and fueled our growth. So please help us keep this going by subscribing for free to our YouTube channel and downloading our episodes on Apple or Spotify podcasts so we can continue to bring you more of what matters. This is Cybercrime Junkies, and now the show. All right, well, welcome everybody to Cybercrime Junkies. I'm your host, David Morrow. In the studio today, I'm very excited. We've got Pat McGarry. He's one of the top technical voices in cybersecurity today. He's got more than 25 years of commercial cybersecurity experience, as well as several years in the U.S. federal government cybersecurity space. He's been granted 3 U.S. patents. That's 3 patents, pretty cool, and is a well sought after public speaker at key security and industry conferences. He's got vast experience in advanced network testing, cybersecurity, deployable machine learning, artificial intelligence, as well as IoT, the Internet of Things. Pat, man, welcome to the studio.
Thank you very much, David. Happy to be here.
I'm really excited about having you here. So, one thing I want to ask everybody. I mean, first of all, let's start from the top. Your current role is CTO of ThreatBlockr.
That's right. Yeah.
Great. And we're going to, hang on. We are getting interrupted by Mark Mosier, who is having some technical problems. Mark, are you able to hear us, or am I throwing you backstage? He still can't hear us. So let us know when you got that fixed, and I'm putting you backstage until then. Okay. So, Pat, how long have you been with ThreatBlockr right now?
Gosh, just about 4 years, almost to the day.
Okay.
When I joined, I was about to start my own company, and one of the board members here and I were talking, and I'd helped out their VC firm. Well, I did a lot of work in the VC community for a while, and they were they were funny. They were like, Pat, we got a lot of money tied up in this company, and at the time it was called Bandura Cyber.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, hey, we want to know if our money's in good. Can you take a look at them for us? And I'm like, look, dude, I'll take a look, but I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to start my own company, man. And he's
right.
like, okay, just take a look. So I looked at them, and I was extremely impressed. You mentioned some of my background. Part of my background was offensive cyber as well. And so I knew how hard it is to protect networks. These guys 4 years ago had the foresight to realize how to do it in a very novel and efficient way. And I told the VC guy, hey, man, your money's in good. Keep investing in these guys. They're going to do great, when their time is here. And then they said, that's great. We thought you'd say that. Come help us. And I'm here. Still here 4 years later.
Oh, that's great. Well, and I think that gives huge credibility, and it makes you feel good, right? Because it's always a risk going to what some would deem a startup. This has clearly evolved way past a startup phase, but it's still a remarkable platform and company and organization. I've known people that have worked there for a long time. But let's get to that in just a second. I want people to understand your background. So one thing I always want to know is what got you into the cybersecurity space? Some people it's 9/11. Some people it's because in my view anyway, to be involved in cybersecurity, it's bigger than just the job. There's a greater calling. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I think that this is going to sound a little bit hokey, but it's just true. I like making a difference, in the world. I just think that's important. I mean, you go through life, right? And you have to choose what you want to do. And
yeah, it goes by faster than you think. I've been on this spinning blue ball for quite a while, and I can't. It's like a blink of an eye, and I'm like, I better help this place before I'm done.
Right. And I joke around with folks all the time. I wish I didn't have this job, because if I didn't, that means the world would be a better place. But the fact is, we need people to figure out this cybersecurity mess that we're in. And the name here of the show, Cybercrime Junkies, right? I mean, you guys exist for the same reason, right? I mean, we know there's this huge set of problems. We all want to help solve it. That's what drives me. That's why I'm still in cybersecurity to this day in some way, shape, or form. And I probably will be my whole career, unfortunately, right? I
Yeah.
wish I could go do something different because that would mean we've moved on, but we haven't.
Yeah. And it's so interesting in the sense that 20, 30 years ago, we always talk about this. 30 years ago, we had two versions of everything, right? We had our real world life, business, organization, family, and then we had this kind of electronic copy of the world. Like, we'd go to work, we could do things paper, pencil, in person, etc. And then we would kind of be recording it and trying to do things electronically. But if that was compromised or wasn't working or was down, we could still function, right? And then something happened in the last 10 years or so where everybody is solely either online or at least digital. And it's really made it much more um, just critical for daily function, whether it's your family, your organization, your charity, your work. It's really kind of remarkable. So when you were growing up, was there an event that kind of inspired you, or was it just where did you take a military path? Just share with us. Uh,
Yeah. I was born and raised in the Washington, D.C. area with all that
mm,
comes with, right? So, two things
sure.
to know about people from the D.C. area is those of us who are born and raised here hate politics completely.
It's so
Uh,
true. I have a
it's
lot of friends
insane.
there. It's so true.
But we always have hooks into the federal government in some way, shape, or form. Well, my first, real job was as an intern, so to speak, at the U.S. State Department.
Interesting.
And I got involved with some stuff there and was just really impressed by the level of technology. You don't think about the State Department as being a technical organization, but even 30 years ago, it was.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because I'm that old, And the what struck me when I was there was, this is back when mainframes were still cool, right?
Hmm.
And sitting in the basement of the on D Street there in Washington D.C. at this massive State Department building, right? In a literally a bunker that could survive a nuclear blast, right? And I'm just handling and dealing with this mainframe, and I was like, this is really cool. But then I thought, you know what? This is very, I mean, this is really super secure here. And one of the guys there said, dude, Pat, the Russians are set up just outside of here, and they're trying to figure out a way to get through all this lead. And
Really.
that moment, I was, like 17, 18 years old as an intern, right? Had me thinking, wow, I don't care about politics, but I care about us. I care about
Right.
us as people. I care about our way of life, right? And I'm like, this is really neat. And I'm in school studying for computer science, electrical engineering, math, all this stuff. And I'm like, I can really make a difference with this stuff. I mean, as I figured out how the bad guys operate. Now at that level, it was just nation state kind of stuff, right?
Right.
But fast forward 30 years,
Hmm.
and now this massive number of bad people out there. Some are obviously nation state, many are not, right? Many are just people looking to make a buck,
Yeah,
and
and
it's insane. But that's how I got into it. I stayed in it in some way, shape, or form as I've gone through different industry verticals and whatnot. But it always comes back to that. It's unfortunately still a need.
it is a need. When we think of some like out of the box thinking or ways to stop or hinder cybercrime, you know, how has cybercrime evolved in the last 10 years? What have you observed? Like
Yeah,
it seems to have gotten productized. It's almost, if not nation state, it seems to be condoned
yes,
or collaborated with nation states, and it got a
yeah.
lot more powerful.
And it's really complicated, right? Unfortunately, it would be really nice. This is going to sound funny until you understand what I mean by it. It'd be really nice if all the bad guys were here in the U.S.
Oh yeah.
because then we could arrest them and throw them in jail.
Well, because they'd be at dinner like bragging. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and the FBI could
Like the
catch them,
mafia from
right?
the 80s and 90s. They'd
Right.
be out there. They couldn't help themselves, right? They
It's
would want to
hard
be
for
out there bragging.
yeah, it's hard for the FBI to catch a guy in Iran
Yeah,
or North Korea
exactly.
or
Oh
China
yeah.
or Russia or even France, right? And it's
Hmm.
hard because you got to work through all this stuff, right? So it's number one thing to realize is it's an international problem. Unfortunately, there's not an international solution because all these countries don't play nice together, right? So they're harboring bad people on purpose, not necessarily for nation state reasons, but because they can. and they know they're causing us grief, right? Us being the good guys, whether it's the U.S., whether it's somebody else,
Or
somebody that somebody
UK,
hates, right?
yeah, all of it.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're all fighting
people,
the
right?
same
It's
battle.
hurting people,
Hmm.
and that's the number one thing I've seen in the past probably 2 decades. Is that it's really really hard for law enforcement to net this stuff. Really hard. The second thing I've noticed, and this is just extremely unfortunate, no politics in the statement, but the Snowden leaks were immense with what happened in terms of the cyber actors, threat actors becoming more proficient in what they can do. They learned a lot of the tools, techniques, procedures, that we use, and then they've lambasted that for their own malicious needs, right? So now suddenly the line is very blurred between good and bad and which tools do what and all the stuff. And you've heard some of the household names like Metasploit and Cobalt Strike and all the latest variants, right, that all the various groups are using and whatnot. Uh, and the list goes on and on and on, right, of all these tools at their disposal. And then ones that, just out there that are variants of these things that people now know how they operate, they can create them on their own. So that's the second thing I've seen the last couple of years is this proliferation of really powerful tools, right?
Hmm.
Really hard to deal with some of that stuff.
What
The
can
third
can I
thing,
can I put
yeah,
a pin in that real
of
quick?
course.
Is like the leak of we talk about Lockbit a lot because that Lockbit
Mhm.
ransomware gang is kind of so prolific and so
Yeah,
notorious, and they seem to have personality. What effect did the leaking of their ransomware builder have? Is that kind of what you're talking about too?
yeah, all that stuff, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's a bazillion different companies that have had this stuff leak, or it's not necessarily a leak. It's somebody buys it and then somebody steals it, right?
Right.
It's it's modern software piracy meant for not to play games like in the old days, right? Or oh
Hmm.
my god, I got the latest Might and Magic. Oh, cool, right? Now it's more
Right.
like okay, I just stole this super cool tool and now I'm going to use it to, hurt somebody, right?
Right.
Whether it's
Yeah.
financially or sabotage or espionage or whatever.
Yeah. Okay, so I didn't mean to interrupt. So,
Yeah, no, it's okay.
you were on point too about the
Yeah.
spreading of these very powerful tools. What else?
The third one, and I think it's probably the most important to be brutally honest, is the realization that the bad guys are smart and getting smarter,
Oh yeah.
right? I mean, it kills me how we constantly underestimate our enemy. I hate sports analogies, but this is a great one, right? If you are a professional football team and you're playing another professional football team, you are not going to underestimate them or you're going to lose, right?
Right.
Period. Right? Well, we are as an industry underestimating our adversaries, and it's
Hmm.
clear every single day. And until we get in our heads that our adversary is as smart or smarter than we are, probably the latter, by the way, because they're
Hmm.
actually operating and hurting people. So we're doing something wrong as a community, right? That's still happening, right?
Hmm.
Until we realize that, we're in big trouble. It's like step one of any process, right? First, you got to admit there's a problem.
I agree completely. And what's interesting is I see so many different reports, right? Because there's so many different controls, so many different standards. They're all over the place, and depending on what industry you're in, but some of them like almost talk down about the
Yeah,
skill level of the threat actor. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like these guys are like
wicked, wicked
they're
smart.
wicked smart
Yeah,
and they're well funded. I saw one recent report where they were like, well, they don't have the resources to do what we
uh-huh.
do. I'm like, dude, they have 10 times the
Yep,
resources that you do. This is buy an island type money. This isn't
right.
like, oh, I get to buy a Bugatti car. It's like, dude, this is like we've seen some of this stuff. It's ridiculous the power that is behind this. So it's,
Absolutely correct.
you know,
And when I hear that a lot too, like, well, they don't have much money. I'm like, well, oh, hold on, and you're a startup, right? And how much money do you have?
right,
They have more than you, right?
right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's insane. They're extremely well funded. They are the biggest ones are have their hooks and are nation state backed in some way, shape, or form now, which gives them effectively unlimited money should they need it. Um, and yeah, they are extraordinarily wicked smart. And you don't got to believe what I'm saying. Just I hate saying this because it shows how old I am. Read the papers, right? I mean, every single day somebody's getting hacked. These aren't just mom and pop shops. Big, huge names are getting hacked every single day. I
No,
mean,
absolutely.
it's nuts. And
Yeah,
until you realize that these guys are smart, you can't solve it.
certainly. So let me ask you, what are some of the the biggest challenges for CISOs or for IT leaders, security leaders for an organization today? What are some of there's so many things. There's the threat environment, the landscape, your footprint. There's so many different vulnerabilities, but what are some of the biggest challenges that you're seeing that they have?
The number one biggest challenge by far, there's not even a close second, is the natural human mentality to think that it's never going to happen to me.
Absolutely.
It's
We
really
see that every
hard
day.
for a CISO or a CIO to convince an organization that it is going to happen to us unless we do something about it, right?
Hmm.
It's always, oh, it'll never happen. We're fine. They're not going to come after us. Or if they do, we're protected. A, they're going to come after you. B, you're not protected, right?
Hmm.
And it's that mindset. If you can convince your organization as a CISO or CIO that that mindset has to change, it is going to happen to you. Don't let me hear you think that it's not. And your actions better dictate that you think it is, right? That's step one. That's the
Hmm.
biggest challenge. If they can get over that, the other things they have to do will become easy.
Certainly.
But those things are, we can talk about those things, what those things should be. But unless you've done that first thing, everything else you do won't matter. You have to convince people that this is a real problem, a real challenge, something you got to deal with every single day. You have to wipe out of your mind this "it will not happen to me" mentality.
When this cuts across all size organizations too, because I hear that often, especially in the SMB space,
Oh yeah,
right? Like I'm in Kansas, I'm a 50 employee organization. They're not looking at us. I'm like, oh, they absolutely are.
absolutely they are. Yeah, and it's funny. We can actually, we prove that at my current company. We show people that they're in your network already. I mean, we can
Hmm.
prove it to you. They do care, and they're just sitting around and waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment may or may not be during your term of employment, but it's going to be in the next guy's.
Yeah, exactly.
So
And there's
yeah.
some, yeah, dwell time is something that is so convoluted, right?
Oh yeah.
If you Google dwell time, right, you'll see that it's anywhere between 280 days or whatever. But then when you look at some of the most recent kind of major ransomware attacks, you find it's a week or two. But it's almost like it seems like they're doing a lot of reconnaissance for a long time undetected.
Yeah, they are because they
Which
can.
bolsters your first point that they're really smart
They're wicked
because
smart.
they're playing the long
That's
game.
right. That's right. And it's because they are wicked patient.
Mhm.
They know they can afford to be patient because they can't be caught,
Right.
right? Especially when they're operating in these areas or with effectively protection, right, so to speak,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And protection comes in more ways than just government. But you can be protected by a lot of different things, right? Crime, organized crime can protect you, right? So a ton of
Mhm.
different ways you can be protected. These guys are effectively protected, and they know it. They know they have time. They know you can't find them. They laugh at all the star DRs, right? I call it all MDR, XDR, EDR, star DR because, okay, yeah, they'll eventually get detected, but if it's 8 months later, they've already got what they need, right? If
Right.
8 minutes later, they might already have what they need, right?
Right.
That's the funny thing about dwell time is,
Well, there's so
whether
many other
it's,
pieces. I mean, the detection piece is so important, but
oh
there's so
yeah,
many other pieces that have to like I'm still blown away by how many organizations, even SMBs, that have never done like a tabletop exercise,
never,
never
yeah,
practiced, never they've never done it. And if you own a business and you're listening today, please, I don't care who you hire, go do this
yeah,
because it's ridiculous. We all had fire drills when we were a kid. Why? Because otherwise, on an actual fire, kids would die, right? Because they're going to be running around. They're not going to know where to go. It's going to be panic, chaos, all of that. And yet, in business, we spend our entire adult lives building, supporting these brands,
yeah,
and then we don't practice for what is essentially a fire, right?
yeah, yeah. It's
And
funny,
it
like
just blows
there's
my
the old
mind.
adage, right? Practice makes perfect.
Yeah.
And if you don't practice, you don't even play, right? Well,
Yeah.
yeah. And this is one of those places where, again, I don't like military analogies either, but this is a good one, right? I mean,
I
every
love
good
analogies,
military
so keep
on the
sharing them.
every
Yeah.
military on the planet, right? I mean, the good
Yeah.
ones practice, practice, practice. They
All
train,
the
train,
time.
train, 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 action. Train, 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 action. Right?
Right.
We don't do that in cyber
No.
at all. We are completely reactive. We're hoping against hope that we'll magically be able to solve the problem after it happens.
Mhm.
Think what would happen if a military tried to do that. Oh, you know
It'd
what?
be
If we
like
get attacked, we'll take care of it.
It
but
would
we don't have
be,
any idea how to fire a gun.
yeah.
What? Right? You
I
got
can
to
think
think
of a
about
couple
cyber as
countries,
being at
militaries
war.
that are like that, but I
Oh
don't want to
yeah.
get into that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we are literally in the cyber
Unbelievable.
community, whether we want to know it or not, we are at war.
Hmm.
And you have to know how to act. And we clearly don't. And I can prove it, right? We haven't solved that. It'll never happen to me mentality.
Right.
Militaries always know they can get attacked. They admit it, right? B, we refuse to tell people to do simple things and enforce it or regulate it. Like, for example, why don't we just do the simple stuff? Why aren't we all changing our passwords regularly? Oops.
Oh, it's too much. I'm busy curating
Right.
my
Oh,
life
I'm
on
too busy.
TikTok. I can't do that.
Right.
Right. Like I can't.
Yeah, I just let LastPass handle that for me. Excuse
Yeah,
me, I just got
exactly.
hacked again.
And that's good. How's that working for you?
Yeah, right, right, exactly, right.
Right.
Why aren't you updating your software when you have patches now as opposed to 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years from now? Are you nuts?
Right.
People
Right.
talk about the 0 days as this horrible thing. No, the most horrible thing are all the things that now the bad guys know about because we all published them, all the new CVEs, and now they can go exploit them because now we told them how to do it and nobody's patched their software yet. Why aren't we patching our software regularly? Right? Why
It,
not?
it's confusing to know what I think everybody kind of has a sense of some of what they should do, right? But there's so many different controls. There's so many different rules and regulations out there. Like there's no one mandate that it's still optional, right? And I think that is it's a big piece. I'm certainly
Yes,
not a proponent in any realm of my life for more regulation,
same.
but in this, right, but in this space, it's kind of like somebody's got to parent this scenario, and it seems like it's the Wild West. You know, like like a just a bunch of kids running wild
Yeah.
because nobody there is no mandated at least do this. Like there's no
There's no
issue.
playbook, right?
There's no
There's
play.
no this
There's
is the
no
gospel.
one thing that is controlling that is
That's right.
saying if you cannot play if you don't regularly change your passwords or have complex passwords, have multi-factor authentication,
Correct.
patch regularly within a specific time frame, notify this, have some you know detection involved, like certain things that you kind of know it kind of bubbles to the top what the best practices are, but nobody some cite this one, some cite that one, and they make socially acceptable excuses not to have to go and do the effort. How do we
Man,
fix that?
honestly, I completely agree with everything you just said, by the way. I mean, I am completely anti regulations. Here's why, though. Most regulations that you see, and this is coming from a guy born and raised in DC area, right? I see
Yeah, yeah,
regulations all the time, right? And none of them can really be effectively audited. So if you
true,
can't audit it, why are you regulating it, right? But guess what?
true,
Those couple of things we mentioned, you can audit trivially without a lot of money. Are your employees changing your passwords? You can check. You can
right.
enforce limits on time frames for passwords, right? You can actually do that
Yeah,
with tools.
you can do a script up front and just
Yeah.
make it happen,
Are they
right?
using
Of course.
MFA? You can require that.
Yeah.
Why aren't you? Right? Oh, it's too hard. No, it's not. It's easy.
The
It's just like
awareness
learning how to
training,
ride a
like,
car. When I learned how to ride a car, it took
yeah,
me a couple of weeks to figure it out. Now I can drive a car anywhere I want, right? I know how to do it
right.
now. Same
Oh,
thing there.
yeah.
And then you can also audit software patches. You can
Hmm.
audit that. So
And even like
why are we
training for
regulating
end
those three
users.
things?
Yeah, like training for end users, right?
Yeah.
Well, you can audit that. There's a way of like tracking that. You can see, you know, a lot of people bash some of the test phishing platforms out there. I kind of like it because it's one of the only ways for empirical evidence to show that somebody's actually changing their behavior.
I
Because
agree with you.
otherwise, it does the same if you just send an email out every Tuesday for Tech Tuesday. I'm like, no, it doesn't. How do we know they've read it, they've understood it, it's resonated, they've actually changed their behavior from it? But by testing them periodically, you can actually tell. You can actually tell people are starting to learn. Fewer people are causing that social engineering element.
I
So,
very much agree.
yeah.
One of the things I love, we're a small company, right? We have like 25 people or so, something like
Hmm?
that, 30. I can't remember how many it was. Not many, right? I love when I get a notice from an employee that says
Oh,
flags an
yeah.
email as a phishing attempt.
Yeah,
That
no.
tells me these guys are listening, right? They're actually hearing what I'm saying, right? That you got to be on the
And
lookout for this stuff.
Yeah, no, my team is just they think I'm so paranoid because I'm like, is this a fish? Is this a? I'm always like, as soon as I see anything, I'm always alerting, and I'm always doing that. And they're like, actually, this one's legit. I'm like, if it said DocuSign, I wasn't expecting one. They're like, it's a comp thing. I'm like, okay, I'll take that. That's okay. I can click on that, but I had to check first. But
Yep.
I'm hyper alert, probably more so because of
Better that than
what
the
we do
alternative,
here.
right?
Well, yeah, because you know, this wouldn't be a very effective podcast if I was the cause of something like that, right? That would be a whole other episode. So let's talk about ThreatBlockr. So I've known people that have worked there. I know your team, great people, like great culture, outstanding. I've actually had a demo of your platform of several months back. I really like it. Like I
Oh, thank
really
you.
like explain to everybody what it is, especially for
Sure.
people that aren't watching. And we're not doing a demo here visually, so just
Yeah, yeah.
walk us through it.
Yeah, it's a set of technologies that's based just fundamentally on the recognition that the bad guys are smart.
Mhm.
And the way that we've chosen to help solve the problem is by building a platform that can take as much information from all the smart good guys so that you can counteract all the smart bad guys. So we effectively gather in real time
The
cyber intelligence
premium
from all over
threat
the world.
feeds,
Yeah,
all the open
open
source
source
threat
feeds,
feeds,
government
all that.
feeds, industry feeds, ISAC feeds, ISAL feeds,
Oh, that's great.
mom and pop feeds, paid fees, all this stuff comes in, right? And we pay for some of it. All our customers get it. Others, our customers pay for and pulled in. So it effectively allows you to take any amount of this information at any scale and then block all of it in real time without impacting your network performance. So this is one of the dirty little secrets of security, right? Is a lot of folks think that you can only have security if you give up performance. Not
Right.
with what we do, because what we've basically done is built this effectively it's a Bloom filter. We patented a Bloom filter on order one search engine effectively for dealing with this amount of massive cyber intelligence so that we can block it at any scale. And then we sit in line, typically right in front of a next gen firewall. So we never tell people we're not
So you're on the
replacing anything.
outside of the firewall or on the
Yeah,
inside of the
typically.
firewall? On the
That's where most
outside.
people
So
will
you're
put
the
us because
main
it's easier.
layer right before the firewall. Now, wouldn't see, here's my question. So let me be the Simon Sinek. Let me play idiot in the room so that I can ask the obvious questions. Because honestly, it's how I learn. So how is this different than what a firewall does?
Yeah. Firewalls can only operate on limited sets of intelligence because of the way that they were built over a decade ago now. It's funny, like we call them next generation firewalls,
Right.
and it's 12 years later. It's a few generations more than one.
Right.
So what's going on here? Why are we still using a decade plus old technology when the bad guys have leapfrogged everything? Remember how they were built. They were built with deep packet inspection in mind, right? This is back in the day in their defense, right, where they didn't have lots of people out there saying who all the bad guys were. Nobody knew who they were yet. We just knew that there were
Right.
some bad guys doing stuff. No one was
Mhm.
categorizing them and tabulating them yet. There was no web root proofpoint domain tools doing the kind of stuff they're doing today yet, right? They were in the infancy still. So back then, all you could do was look at every single packet, decrypt everything, run it through a whole bunch of snort, filters, and say, I want to block this or not. But the challenge now is the bad guys again are smart. So once they
And
realize
there's
how the
all this
next gen
intelligence
firewalls
out
work,
there listing. There's all this intelligence out there listing what is bad immediately, right? And so you can gather all of that and put that filter in.
yep. So what we do differently is we don't do any deep packet inspection. We don't care about the payload. We just care where this stuff is coming to and going from. It's a really old principle. People have thought about IP filtering for a long time. The
Mhm.
difference with what we're doing is we can do it at any scale. And now that there's so much data about those bad guys, we can actually make a difference. And what we see is when you put us in line, we immediately dump 30 to 50% of the traffic that's known malicious just out, which means the rest of the security stack can work much more efficiently, doesn't cause performance issues,
So all the
real straightforward.
spam, all the effectively all the spam, the noise, all that
Yep.
crap, you're able to keep out
Yep.
in
And that
addition
really
to keeping out the
simplifies the
bad
life of the
stuff.
next gen firewall. But the most important thing,
Ah,
though, is not that we're making its life easier. We're actually blocking more than it is by far.
right.
Because what we
Is there
find is, the
okay?
bad guys when they're doing bad stuff, when they come up with a new thing tomorrow, it's the same bad guy doing it. It's not some
Yeah.
brand new bad guy that just spun up. It's the same guy just using a different threat vector, right?
So is yours geography based or threat actor based? Like what?
D
How
all the
is it?
above. We do it by geo, by ASN, and then just by simple lists, right? So some of our partners, I'll call it a couple of them that are really good at this. Webroot, Proofpoint, Domain Tools, some of the paid ones like Malware Patrol,
Mhm.
Bitdefender. These guys are huge household names, and they're all using different techniques to figure this stuff out. Some of them are using machine learning, some of them aren't, right, to figure this stuff out. And they're finding guys hopping around on public infrastructure now, AWS, Azure,
Right.
GCP, right, Cloudflare. List goes on and on and on of where these bad guys are setting up shop on, and they're detecting it. And they're flagging these IPs in real time where these guys are operating from. And so for sure, right, if you have systems going to or coming from those things, you potentially have a problem, you should be blocking that traffic.
So it's actually being tied to the threat actors themselves.
Yep.
Very innovative. I love it. There's going to be links in the show notes. So please check it out. They'll do a demo for you. It was really cool. What I loved, and then I have got a couple other things I still want to talk about. But I love the dashboard, like where you were
Oh, thank
able
you.
to
Yeah.
it was like really smooth. Think of like an iPad, where you can just kind of turn something off, turn something on, move a button back and forth, and you can scale the degree of risk that you want. Because some places, like, they don't, like, if you haven't looked at your cybersecurity posture, you have a dial that is scaled all the way up, right, for risk, right? And then as you start to apply certain things, you can dial it down, but you can always gauge what your comfort level is as a business owner, right? Or as a leader in an organization. And what I loved is your platform allows people to do that. You're able to kind of set different things. It was really, really impressive.
Oh,
So,
thank you. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
what
And
what
I'm
what I
agnostic. I'm agnostic
yeah.
when it comes to tools, because to me, it's still the people behind it. But um, your engineering guys and everything really collaborative, great dudes to work with. So,
That's one of the reasons I
um,
joined the company. Being brutally honest, was
well,
I
yeah, because you
thought
were
their
about to
engineering
start
team
your
was
own.
fantastic.
Yeah,
Yep.
what I loved about your comment was, I was going to do something on my own, and they just had me look at it, and I looked at it, and I was like, "Hey, your money's safe." And then they're like, "Okay, well, we want you to come work there," and you're like, "You actually chose to do that."
Yep.
So that's pretty remarkable. That says a lot. So I'm thinking that you might be able to find a different place if you ever wanted to, or start your own. So the fact that you're choosing to be there and to build that really says a lot about the place, right? And about the platform. So, well, that's so needed too. It's so interesting how your founders kind of saw that gap, saw that void. I love
Yeah,
the
they
visionary people.
realized what they
I love the
realized, which was
visionary.
ahead of its time, was that they
Yeah.
literally they recognized that deep packet inspection was not going to withstand the
Yeah.
test of time by itself. They
Right.
knew it. And then they knew that they had to do IP filtering at scale and DNS filtering at scale where you could see it, which you can't all the time, right? In the age of
Hmm.
de-encryption, but it resolves to IP addresses. So if you can figure out a way to do that, you can solve this in the future when there's more information. So they took that bet, and they were right. Right now, you have all these companies telling you who the bad guys are,
Yeah.
and a couple of them telling you after the fact. Like if
Right.
you get hacked, who do you call? You call Mandiant, and then they tell you who the bad guys were that are in your network, right? Well, what
Hmm.
if you just block those guys in the first place?
Hmm.
That's what these guys were, had the foresight to see and do. And that's why I joined, because I knew that that was the right approach. And the beauty of that is you can layer that into any existing network, uh, trivially, as a bump in the wire, right? Whether it's on premise
Absolutely.
or in the cloud.
Absolutely. So, given your experience with the federal government, and what departments were you with when you were working
uh,
for the federal government?
Around the DC area, so most of the
If you're
various
not allowed to
prophetic.
say, we're going to just conjecture. So, if you want to mention like an agency you were with or whatever, that's fine.
I've done some stuff with most of them, through my career here. Again, just by virtue of being in the area.
That's fine. I know many people, and that's exactly how they answer that question. So I will leave that one alone. Um, Let me ask you this. The new US strategy, the cyber strategy. I mean, there have been ones for 25 years or so, and they come out periodically. The newest one um, was, at least for words on paper, was very bold. It was like, we're going to be much more offensive, and we're going to hold some of the manufacturers, raise the level of accountability. And now we're starting to see bills and things in legislation and stuff to bolster that. What's your feedback on that? Do you think this will um what I loved about it is the collaboration between the public and private. Because when you see some of the cybercrime groups taken down, or you see some of these dark web marketplaces like Genesis, right? The Operation Cookie Monster, right? Stuff like when you see stuff like that, and if you don't know what this is, check out past episodes or just Google it because they're really cool stories. But what I loved about it is private sector, public sector, lots of countries involved, the intelligence shared, and they all target at once. And they're like these massive stings and takedowns. It's like a great movie. What the new US strategy, is that going to bolster things like that? Is it going to bolster collaboration? What's your thought on it?
Honestly, I don't think so. I really don't. I wish that I could say it would, but
You know,
they're focusing on the
it's the
wrong
same
things.
answer I get from everybody that has been in your position. And I'm wanting somebody to come on the show and say, this is actually going to work. And here's why. And
Yeah.
I'm not getting that.
I think there is something that could work if it was architected correctly, but there's
Yeah.
too much politics involved. And a
Yeah.
lot of that is from lobbying from industry, right? You have to use this technology or that. It's first and foremost, it's not a technology problem. You got
It's
to
not
remember
come.
that, right? It's a human problem first.
Yeah. It's not
And
coming out of a box no matter
yeah,
what.
you can't solve this out of a box. You can't do it.
Mm-mm.
And you can't just, browbeat people. Well, you're going to be required to do this or else.
Right.
Well, do what? Keep it secure. How do I keep it secure? You're not telling me how to do it, right?
Right.
It's the things we talked about. You got to start there, right? Start with the simple auditing things. What they should do, which they won't because it's government, right? You should just lay out a really simple phase strategy. And the first phase should
Yes.
focus entirely on the human element, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there should be no cutoff time about when that phase ends. There should be somebody that's deciding when it's there, right? And certain organizations, certain entities should be required to do these things. They're not wrong for going after the vendors, right? Like networking vendors, insurance vendors, so on. They're not wrong for doing that. They're wrong about the way they're doing it. And you can't just write a policy and
Right.
say this is going to happen or we're going to fine you or you're going to go to jail. That's not helpful.
No.
Attacking CISOs is not
Well,
helpful.
and,
Um,
and and plus the lawyer in me is like, well, and then they created the language about safe harbors. So
yeah,
I'm telling you, I'm going to get every client I would represent into that safe harbor anyway. So like they're going to litigate that until they're in that safe harbor.
right,
So then your rule and regulation isn't going to apply. So when I
exactly.
saw that, I was like, well, then you're taking the yeah,
Taking the bite out.
yeah, you're really taking the
Yeah,
bite
I
out.
mean, it kills me
Mm,
because I do think that I'm not saying we can solve this problem because I actually think cybersecurity is really, really hard, right? That's why I'm still doing it, all
yeah,
these years. And I don't think there's a definite this will solve the problem. And I think everybody who says that they know that is lying, right? But I do think that there are certain things we should be doing that we're not, and we ought to start there. And I think until we do, we're just beating around the bush, and
think of how
it's
much
not going to
cybercrime we
change.
would be able to stop if we did some of the fundamentals you mentioned. If
Exactly.
everybody had to do,
Right.
right? If you like, when you're filing your corporate tax returns or you're filing your personal tax returns, you have to show evidence that you've done a couple things, right? Like, otherwise, somebody's going to come after you, or there's going to be something bad that
Yeah.
happens.
Otherwise, there's
Just
hell to pay, right? And
otherwise, it's
it's
hell to pay. If
yeah,
if if you could just do that, if everybody had to bolster their own credentials better, just don't, don't have your dog as your password. And still, when these breaches come out and they leak this data and you see what the passwords are, you're like, no wonder they're kicking our butt. Like, holy cow, it's ridiculous, right? I mean, people just don't, they think it's a joke. And
yeah,
and when I say people, I'm talking about Americans. I'm talking about us because when I have these conversations with CISOs and leaders in government over in the UK, it's a different, they treat it like your privacy is a fundamental human right. They take it much more seriously, and the
much.
citizens take it much more seriously. I think that's, I'm learning about that because I don't live there permanently, right? But it seems like there's a whole socioeconomic reason for that. And it's like they don't have bankruptcy laws. They don't have, the banks don't just let you pay $50 and you're off the hook if
Right.
your identity gets stolen. You're personally on the hook for that, which means you're going to care more. So there might be some just, compensation based or financial reason why they do that, which is, I found that interesting. Um, So tell me about this. What uh, I want to talk. I want to get your mindset about the impact that AI is having. So many, now there's like a huge pushback. I'm seeing like people are like, this is kind of like it's a trend. It's kind of going away. I see a lot of bad AI products out there. Like everybody's like, you can make this much money using AI and never really have to work. Just press a button, but and that's all just hype and garbage. But what it is being leveraged often, especially to speed up the process of creating malware and launching malware. You've got a lot of background in this. What is your position on that? Your
It's
feedback on it?
it's it's funny. It's actually simpler than people think it is. I think that a lot of times, you see this new technology and everybody gets scared of it. Um, it's actually simpler than people think, and it goes back to the same kind of things we were talking about in a way. You have to realize that AI, ML, and AI, whether independently or together, because they're different things, right? That combination of things is just another tool. It's just a
Mhm.
tool, and like any tool, they're only as good as the humans behind them. In the ML and AI, I'm not talking about the humans that are creating these tools. I'm talking about what should be as part of any process leveraging it, and they call it human in the loop. If you are using ML and AI without a human in the loop, you're doing it wrong, right?
Right.
And ML and AI, what are they effectively, right? They're basically, for lack, you get details of large language models and all these fancy names and inference and training and all this stuff. Okay, great. Dumb it down to think about I have a kid. He's 6 years old. 4 years ago, he was 2 years old. We were walking out in the street, and he was starting to talk, and he goes, "Daddy, sky green." I'm like, "No, son, the sky's blue." And he goes, "Oh." Next day, went the same walk. He goes, "Daddy, sky blue." That's what machine learning is. It
Mhm.
makes a suggestion about something, and then you tell it if it's right or wrong. Something tells it it's right or wrong, hopefully a human, right? And then it learns from that, what you tell it. That's
Right.
how it actually works in the end. Right now, it's more complicated than that. There's neural networks, and they fan out, and there's probabilities, and blah, 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 blah. But in the end, it's like that, right? Which means that if the humans in the loop aren't coaxing it to think the right way, it's going to be way off, or it's going to sound like it's right sometimes, but be really wrong all the other times, right? So you have to realize that it's just a tool that you're able to use, but never, you have to fight yourself though, right? Anytime a new tool comes around, you always want to use it. Like,
Right.
I am rather handy around the house, but there are certain things I've learned in my life that I can't do well. I am terrible with drywall, so I don't mess with drywall anymore. Right?
Right.
Some people laugh at me like, "Dude, it's easy." Well, not for me. Right? I'd rather
Right.
have a screwdriver and use that. Right? I can't use a screwdriver to patch drywall.
Right.
Right? And you got to realize that with AI, AI is a tool. Use it when it's right, but always, always, always use it with that human in the loop mentality so that you can correct it quickly. And if you find yourself letting an AI system off on its own too long, you should assume it's making wrong decisions.
Right.
Because just like with your kid, because that's what AI is, it's a kid, right? Just
If
like
you
with
let
your
the
kid,
kid
if you're
go.
not constantly reinforcing the right answers and behavior, the kid's going to go off on a tangent and either be wrong or do some really bad stuff.
Yeah.
Same thing with AI.
And how is it being leveraged in by cybercrime today? Like, well, what
Yeah.
are some examples? Are they leveraging it to
Code
launch it?
generation primarily. Most of it's code generation.
What is that? Like,
Yeah.
explain to the listeners what that is.
Yeah. There's a whole bunch of, and I don't want to give any of the bad guys ideas if they're not already figured out how to do this. I don't want to listen to this and figure out how to do this better. But
I don't think any
um,
bad guys are listening to us, but that's
hopefully,
all right.
well, you never
Yeah, you
know.
never know.
But what I will say is they are very good at code generation. To a
Hmm.
degree, right? When they're targeted code generation, you can't just say build me a system that emulates this. It's not going to do that. But if you say,
Right.
build me a piece of code that lets me get from here to there in this number of bytes, it will figure out how to do that, right? The good ones will, once they've trained on it enough times, right? Have enough examples. Well, that's the thing, is that these bad guys have a lot of examples now. And remember, just like when you're training children, you give them more examples, they get better at it. My favorite example is simple mathematics. When you're teaching a kid arithmetic, you don't just say 1 plus 2 and they say 3 and they're done. They got to learn 7 plus 8 and 6 plus 9 and 10 plus 12, right? And on and on and on. And then they get really good at it. Same
Hmm.
thing here. When you have enough examples of bad malicious code, then the code that it can create is really good. Now, the other thing that allows them to do, which is really unfortunate, is you can train those systems to only look at certain examples and not others. It's
Right.
harder for a person to do that. Your mind as a human being is basically a collection of all of your thoughts, learnings, and whatnot. It's hard for you to segment those and not use some of them because your
Right.
mind uses millions of different pathways, much more than AI does. People don't realize that these are still the best computers ever invented, right?
Hmm.
But these AI systems can be told just focus on these things only and
Right.
forget about all the other stuff that you think you know. And now what that means is these malware organizations, these cyber criminals can say, okay, focus just on the way Lockbit does it,
Right.
or focus just on the way Clock works, or
And
focus
it
just on the
seems to be
way,
speeding it up.
APT4X, pick your,
Yeah.
40 group out in China, pick whichever one you want, right? They're all bad, right?
Right.
Does it. So now you can create new malware really, really trivially. And they can do it in a way that can, in literally milliseconds, have a new malware engine which will pass and not be hit by any filter that's out there. And that's why deep packet inspection is really, really challenging now and by itself doesn't work because these things can change so rapidly. Even without ML and AI, you could do that. If you knew how, like yours truly, you didn't have to have those engines to do it. But now that you have those engines, they can do it for
Hmm.
you. Right.
Interesting.
And it's
Sure.
really, really, it's a huge challenge. Now, the good news is the good guys are leveraging ML and AI also,
Right.
mostly for behavioral modeling types of things,
Hmm.
right? And it's an old science, right? It's ML and AI has made it sexy again, but behavioral modeling goes back to way before ML and AI, just a simple, recognition of patterns, right? And in a way, it's just like an expert system kind of a thing, right? That can detect some of that stuff. But now that you're leveraging ML and AI to actually do the behavioral modeling, you're making better decisions quicker. And that really helps for figuring out, like, for example, when bad guys are spinning up in public clouds, which can be really
Exactly.
amazing.
Right.
But there's a lot of uses for it, both on the good side and the bad side. I think the most important
I
thing,
would
though, is
hope.
to do it.
What's your thought? Will it help reduce the mean time to detect, like the
It should.
ability to lessen that dwell time
It should.
when threat, and what we're talking about, listeners, is people that are threat actors that are inside networks probably today in your network that you just don't know because they haven't done anything yet. They're gathering up reconnaissance, they're planning, they might just be taking that information and using it for something else, right? Using it
Yes.
for another attack against another organization. You don't know.
The There are some companies working on this, now, and the trick is not so much a trick, but the way to do it correctly is really hard.
Mhm.
Because remember, these things are they are just like always think of them as a kid. When you get bogged down on all the gory details of people talking about
Right.
ML and AI, they're throwing fancy words at you. Think about a kid, right? Always think about a child, and think about if you're training a child on something, how much information you have to give them. Well,
Right.
if you're trying to use MLAI, a child, right, to figure out in your network what's happening there, you have to think about all the technical things that it needs to know to make an inference, a logical inference. It might need to know, for example, the history of your laptop, David, and the
Right.
hours it's active. It might need to know during those hours it's active, how active is it? How many sites is it typically hitting, right? Which ones are they? What binaries are running, which ones are swapping in and out of disk faster, i.e., gathering data for a ransomware attack,
Mhm.
which ones are using encryption libraries and decryption libraries. And that shouldn't really change much over time unless you're building up a new SaaS environment. Right.
Sure.
So and this is that's just what, 7 things I just named. I can't remember how many it was, but
Mhm.
there's 70 more. Right. If
Right.
you're not giving that child all of the
All of
information,
this.
it's going
And
to
it's
get it
not
wrong.
going to be as effective as it
So
can
think
be.
about what that means. How are you going to gather all that information in real time? Holy
Right.
crap, that's a hard problem.
Right.
Now you're actually putting, load on the computers and the network to gather that, store it. You have to keep that data forever, just like your mind does,
Right.
right? Wow. So if
Unbelievable.
you're trying to use ML and AI and you're not thinking about all those other things, you're doing it wrong. And again,
Yeah.
that's why you need that human in the loop to be able to manage that and do that. It's hard. You can't just say, I'm going to use it and mandate it's going to be used if you're not thinking about all those things you need to actually implement to actually do it correctly.
Well, and I've seen some of your publications or conversations about human in the loop, and it's so key, right? That element
It's a
is
critical
really,
thing.
really, yeah, it really is. Phenomenal. Circling back before we wrap up, the standards, all these different standards. Like people don't know, organizations don't know, leaders in security, they might know certain ones, right? Is there a if an organization doesn't know what to follow, is there at least a good set of controls that you feel is pretty objective that they could at least look at and then apply to their organization? Or is that just it's just too complex to answer that?
I wish there were, David. I wish I could say, go here and do this. Um, but you know how I know there's not? Because those simple first three things we talked about aren't codified in anything anywhere.
Right. There's nothing that says you
Nothing
have to
starts like
do
that. Nothing
these.
starts,
Right.
change your passwords,
Right.
use MFA, update your software. And I don't want to hear the pundits out there, whoa, passwords are dying. No, they're not, dude. They're never going to die. You can
Right.
talk all the way about any other possibility that you have, and I can prove it. APIs. APIs
Right.
are always using an API key. What's an API key? It's just another word for a
It's just
password.
a
You're
password.
always going to have passwords. So if
Yeah.
you're not, and those, so when I say change your password, it's not just your human passwords you're using, it's your
Mhm.
API keys, it's anything you're using to authenticate yourself against another system. If you're not changing
Mhm.
those regularly, you're doing it wrong, right? And if you're
Yeah.
not using MFA when you're doing that, you're doing it wrong. API should have MFA on them too, by the way.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and
They don't.
even assessing like inventories. Like I find so many internal IT and security leaders that really one of the things that keeps them up at night is they've taken this role. They might be there for a couple years, right? But their organization is built on ad hoc different initiatives where they've added all these different pieces and parts to all these different types of programs, systems, platforms, all of this in multiple locations. They don't really know. There's no central command that has a current list of everything that they actually have, how they don't have that visibility.
Yep.
And so if somebody gains entry over here, right? How do we know what a threat actor, where they can go? Can they move laterally? Can they move vertically there? Right? From all of that.
Yeah.
It's
It's
so
really,
complex.
really
It's such a
complicated.
challenge.
Yeah, it really is complicated when you start getting to those levels of, the one people don't talk about a lot, and I'm not saying that they should, by the way. I'm just saying it's an issue, is the insider threat problem, which is what you're describing, right? Somebody
Oh yeah.
somebody or something comes in, and now it's an insider threat, right? And it can be two ways. It can be somebody who's, let's say I join your company and I'm a bad guy, right? Or I'm a good guy to start and I become a bad guy, right? Or I get mad at you and I'm going to steal your stuff, right? Well,
Right.
I'm putting something in there now that can do all these things. It can move laterally. It can grab data from other places, then eventually package it up in a way and be patient about exfiltrating it, right?
Right.
The bad guys have gotten smarter and smarter and smarter. So your point about understanding what they're doing inside is critical. And I tell folks all the time to do those three things we talked about. And then once you do those first three things, and only once you've done those first three things, then go look at other stuff. Look at network security, because eventually they got to exfil the data somehow. It's
Right.
usually via the network. It could be by a guy coming with a USB stick, right? The network
Right.
security is not going to help you if he's doing that, right?
Right.
Taking data out that way, right? That's Snowden. That's what he did, right? But your endpoint security, if you've got good endpoint security, can help against those things. You need both things, right?
Right.
But endpoint security and network security don't do you any good if you haven't done those first three things to start with.
Right.
So and that's this your question is a great one. Like where do people go to say what they should do? Well, I'll postulate they should watch this podcast, right?
Yeah, because I
Because
don't
that's what you
see
should
it
do.
anywhere
Do those
else.
first three
That's the
things,
problem.
then do network security,
Yeah.
then do endpoint security, and you'll
Right.
sleep a lot better at night.
All right. So I'm going to leave it there because that's pretty good. Like that's excellent insight. And I love the fact that we are now the authority for what an organization should do. So we're going to just point them right to this episode.
I think
So
you should.
I think that's great. We should codify it. I'm going to talk to Jen Easterly over at CISA and just get
Nice.
this codified.
Yeah,
So
she's fantastic, by the way. She's done
yeah,
a really
she
good
really
job
is.
in a really tough role there.
Yeah, it's a really tough role, and she seems like she's having fun with it and
Yeah,
really has great ideas. So
she really
I
does. Yeah,
always enjoy it,
I'm a fan.
and yeah, absolutely. Well, so what's next for Pat McGarry and ThreatBlockr? Do you have any? Are you speaking at any engagements coming up? Are you going to be issuing any publications? What's coming up
Yeah,
next
we've
for
got
you?
some good stuff coming up later this year. Our you've met some of our marketing team. They're really good.
Oh
You
yeah,
know,
really good.
they really try to make a good, solid difference. They're not in it just to generate leads, right? They're in
Hmm.
it also to realize that we have to educate the world on this problem and help. And I love that about the messaging. Like, you know, they're not going to get mad at me for saying do those first three things before you go talk to ThreatBlockr, right?
Right.
I mean, because it's the honest right thing to do, right?
They're all
But you'll see
layers,
stuff
right?
coming out from us.
Yeah.
We have some new product things coming on to kind of grow out this thing beyond just blocking these known threats and stuff. You'll see some of that later this year.
Great.
But honestly, for me, it's just doing more and more of the same, trying to get the word out, trying to get people to realize that this is a really hard problem. Don't ignore it. Um, and I wish somebody would, say, I don't know who, right, would actually just say, okay, these are the things you need to do, right?
Yeah.
I can say it to my heart bleeds, but nobody wants to listen until it comes from some other massive source out there that says this is the way it should be. And unfortunately, most of the regulations that are being written right now aren't being written correctly.
Yeah. Unbelievable. Well, we'll have links to you, connect with Pat McGarry, also links to ThreatBlockr. Check them out. If you're a leader in an organization, you own a business, definitely worth getting a demo, looking at it. It's really an impactful security layer to help you sleep at night. And
Well, thank you, David. I appreciate that.
Patrick, we thank you very much for your time today, and we'll welcome the chance to have you back because there's going to be other things. We've been following the
Absolutely.
Move It breach. We didn't even get to talk about that, but the Move It breach is just continuously growing. It's a horrible thing that these organizations are dealing with a platform that they were all using to kind of keep and transfer in an encrypted way, right? The most confidential documents back and forth. And it's really kind of blowing up on people and it's tragic. But thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it. Thank you for listening, everybody. And we will see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks again, David.
Thank you, sir. Well, that wraps this up. Thanks for joining, everybody. Hope you got value out of digging deeper behind the scenes of security and cybercrime today. Please don't forget to help keep this going by subscribing free to our YouTube channel at Cybercrime Junkies Podcast and download and enjoy all of our past episodes on Apple and Spotify podcasts so we can continue to bring you more of what matters. This is Cybercrime Junkies, and we thank